in Colorado, but it's a bigger job than it used to be. Sure, they're cautiously optimistic. They're running against President Donald Trump in a state that voted against him. But there are no guarantees in politics, and this year comes with a new obstacle. More than 1 million voters who used to have to wait till November can make their voices heard this month in the primary. Independent voters outnumber either Democrats or Republicans in Colorado, and this year they get to choose one party primary ballot to turn in. Each party has 4 candidates standing. Tonight, you'll meet the Democrats: Congressman Jared Polis, Lieutenant Governor Donna Lynne, former state treasurer Cary and former state senator Mike Johnston. One will become the nominee this month. The Democrats hope for keeping control of the governor's mansion. The choice is up to you.
This is Decision 2018, the race for governor. Tonight's moderators are 9 News anchor Kyle Clark and 9 News political reporter Brandon Rittiman.
Good evening, I'm Kyle Clark.
And I'm Brandon Rittiman. Welcome to this Democratic primary debate in the race for governor.
Thursday night, same time, same channel, the Republican candidates for governor will join us for their second debate of their primary.
Kyle and I alone chose the format tonight and the questions. They have not been shared with the candidates in advance. The candidates are on stage from left to right by their last names.
No opening statements tonight. We will have closing statements by the candidates, who will have 45 seconds to answer most of our questions. There is a countdown clock that's visible to them.
We will also occasionally ask for a show of hands or a short answer to try to suss out differences in where the candidates stand.
All right, let's get started. This morning, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of a cake baker from Lakewood who cited his religious beliefs and refusing to make a cake for a gay couple. Let's discuss this from a few angles. First, this ruling by the Supreme Court said that Colorado's Civil Rights Commission, appointed by the governor, disparaged the baker's religious faith. How do you believe that Colorado should prevent discrimination while balancing religious beliefs? And do we need new laws to do that? Mr. Johnston.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. I do think today was a step backward for Colorado. You know, Colorado has a hard legacy with trying to overcome a history of discrimination. We had Amendment 2 25 years ago that allowed people to discriminate based on people's sexual orientation. I was proud when I was in the state Senate we passed civil unions, and with marriage equality we were heading in the right direction. I think what I worry about here is you now have the prospect of a gay couple who goes in for one of the happiest moments of their life to pick their cake, and they get halfway through that and don't realize that they can't get served at that location. So what I've called is that if we live under this regime, we ought to have a moment where businesses in Colorado will come out affirmatively and declare that they are open for business. So I'm going to propose a hashtag called Open Colorado and invite all those people in the wedding industry to share it, so you know as a gay couple where you can go to make sure you have the full services that every Coloradan should deserve.
Free market solution as opposed to new laws. Ms. Kennedy.
Kyle, it's a sad day that the Supreme Court has rolled back so much of the progress we have made in expanding equal rights here in our country and in our state. I think it's important to recognize that this decision was very narrow, and Colorado's anti-discrimination laws do not allow businesses to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. This does not allow business owners to turn a customer away because of their sexual orientation. So we need to make sure that we protect the laws in this state, keep them intact, that guarantee equal protection for everyone here in Colorado.
So as we've made clear here, the ruling does not change Colorado law, but I'm curious whether you think it should change the composition or the work of the commission, which was wholly indicted by the Supreme Court today. Ms. Lynne.
Well, I agree. I mean, this was a very disappointing day for Colorado because we are a pro-equality state. And it was a very limited decision, however. So I think the message that we are the state that we are and treat everyone the same is still there. The message really revolved around the Civil Rights Commission. And in fact, there was a bill passed earlier in the session. The governor signed it into law that provides the kind of training for boards and commissions that we oversee that makes sure that the boards and commissions don't let their personal biases come into these decisions. So I think, you know, we've got a very thorough process right now, and through the legislature, we're firming that up even more as we go into 2018 and 2019.
Steady as she goes, or change the approach, Mr. Polis?
You know, there was a shameful years in this nation's history when stores, restaurants would routinely exclude people of certain races or certain faiths. I'm a member of the Jewish faith, and when my parents were growing up, there were a lot of clubs that didn't allow them to join. But you know, who we are as a society is one that cherishes religious freedom, but we also believe that religious freedom should never be used as an excuse to discriminate against anybody. You know, people of faith are people of love, and it should be about cherishing one another and respecting one another for our differences.
Mr. Polis, thank you.
So we talked about the wedding cake. Let's talk about the person who's front and center actually doing the hitching. Does anyone here, by show of hands, feel that churches should have to perform marriages for same-sex couples in order to keep a tax-exempt status? No hands up. Thank you.
Let's give voters a sense of where you all agree and disagree on gun policy. I'm going to ask you a few show of hands questions, and then we can explore any contrasting positions that we have. By a show of hands, would you as governor sign a bill banning so-called assault weapons like the popular AR-15? All 4 of you. Next, would you sign such an assault weapons ban if it was retroactive and it meant the confiscation of those weapons from Coloradans who already own them? A show of hands, would you sign a retroactive ban? No hands. Coloradans who owned high-capacity magazines prior to 2013 and the gun control legislation those years, they were allowed to keep them. They were grandfathered in. By a show of hands, would you sign a new retroactive mag ban that would confiscate those high-capacity magazines? No hands there. And then lastly, after the school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas, there's a lot of talk about potential criminal liability for gun owners who do not secure their weapons. By a show of hands, as governor, would any of you sign legislation that would bring about criminal liability for gun owners who do not secure their weapons?
So it's a complicated question,
Sure,
Kyle.
I think there's an interest in talking about it.
The details are very important.
Yeah, let's dig into that. So universal interest in that, but let's explore. Mr. Polis first.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about establishing liability or some sort of insurance program, you need to be very respectful of what the laws are. The fact is, it can already be criminal charges against a parent who who leaves their gun in the way of a child who gains access with a tragic consequence. And you have to be careful about making sure that new laws are able to be implemented and enforced. So again, the concept can work. People should take responsibility as gun owners, right, to store their weapons safely at home. But you also have to make sure that you don't do anything that makes it harder on hunters and sportsmen and people who own guns for self-defense. So I think there's a germ of an idea there, but you have to be very thoughtful about how you hash that out to make sure that we provide a financial mechanism to ensure responsible gun ownership.
And you say financial, are you talking about a civil penalty or are you talking about a criminal penalty?
Well, it's your proposal, Kyle, so you tell me.
We were talking about criminal penalties.
There are criminal penalties
okay.
today if a parent doesn't, leaves a gun out and a kid uses it.
Okay.
So, and those have, different kinds of enforcement, but there are criminal penalties today.
Mr. Johnston.
Yeah, I think you want to make sure that there's a relationship that establishes responsibility. So if you have a parent and a child and that parent is negligent and leaving weapons out that they can use to hurt themselves or others, there's reason there to take caution. If you have roommates that are unrelated that are living in a common apartment complex, that's a very different question. So I think there is a way for us to encourage responsible gun owners to make sure that they're keeping their kids safe without unduly burdening people that are living in other cohabitation situations.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Lynne, you told a voter at a recent gathering of ours, quote, "I don't own a gun. I don't ever want to own a gun. They scare me." Roughly a third of the people in this state own a gun. How can you convince them that you're going to understand how they look at issues around guns when you say you're flat out afraid of them?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues that people disagree on, but it doesn't influence how they lead. And so respecting the rights of gun owners, as you saw in the show of hands, I understand that. I personally don't, as I said, made a choice not to own a gun and not to either hunt or use it for protection, and it's my own personal preference, like we have a lot of other personal preferences around the music that we listen to or what we do, whether we drive a fuel-efficient car or we don't. So it is a wide open state in terms of making those decisions, and I don't think I'd be moving to take them away from the people that are protected by the Constitution and by other laws in Colorado.
Thank you much. Mr. Johnston, why are you telling people you were the one who led the effort to pass the 15-round limit on ammunition magazine? I ask because I looked up the bill. It has 21 Democrats listed as sponsors, and you're not among them.
So if you look at the debate on the floor of the state Senate on this, I was the one who spoke on and made the case for our side around these magazine limits. There were many people involved. Certainly any significant act like this requires leadership. But I think the real story about this debate on magazine bans is that there are real differences among the people on this stage on some things. There are things we agree on and things we don't. But I will say after the Aurora Theater shooting and after the Newtown tragedy, I stood in the well of the state Senate and fought to ban high-capacity magazines. At the same time, Jared opposed high-capacity magazine bans at the federal level. And so there is a real difference on where we stood when this question was called and when we had to recover from the Aurora Theater shooting that I think is a difference in the record that matters.
Mr. Polis, very quickly.
Since I was name-checked there, I've taken on the NRA for my first day in office to support universal background checks. I co-authored a bill to ban bump stocks, and yes, I co-authored a bill to ban assault weapons. I'm the father of a six-year-old and a 3-year-old. Nobody should have that fear of what could happen to their kids at school. Like so many Americans, I've learned a lot and followed this issue, and I've seen the harm that these weapons of war can cause in our schools, in concert halls, and in theaters. And I support
specifically address
what
he said about your actions in Congress, though.
There was never a vote on magazines or assault weapons. He refers to me not sponsoring the bill, but you know what? He never wrote or sponsored a bill to ban assault weapons during his entire time in the state legislature.
That's not the question, with all due respect. The question is, after the theater shooting where we knew there was a high-capacity magazine used, I fought to lead and pass legislation to eliminate those high-capacity magazines. Jared publicly said he opposed them, which was one of the reasons why it didn't come up for a vote, because other Democrats said they wouldn't support it. And at the same time, when we were fighting to pass universal background checks, I think the first legislation that you co-sponsored as one of 3 Democrats was to make it easier for firearm dealers to move arms across state lines. I don't think that's the response Coloradans are looking for when we're burying 4-year-olds after the Aurora Theater shooting. I think it's taking a hard stand on the issues that matter, which are making sure you ban magazines.
Well, first of all, that bill you're referring to was backed by the Brady campaign and gun safety groups because it provided for universal background checks. The fact is, I'm the only one of the 4 people here to put my name on a bill to ban assault weapons, Mike. You had every opportunity to do that for 8 years, and you never did.
All right, Mr. Polis, thank you. The next question is actually for you. So, your campaign has made a point that you're refusing big donations. You voluntarily cap them at $100. And that's obviously possible because you are contributing your own great wealth to your campaign. Could you specifically outline how the other people here with us tonight are influenced and beholden to their big money donors? And please use names.
So I like to say the fact that I'm putting my own money in the old IT language we used to use, that's a feature, not a bug. I think people are frustrated that their politicians seem to be working for special interests in big corporations rather than them. I'm really running for governor to be able to take on the special interests. So you know that when I'm fighting for better prescription drug rates, you know that when I'm fighting for universal health care and Medicare for all, you know that I'm taking on the gun manufacturing lobby, that I wasn't put there by any of them. I'm only put there by the people.
What are the special interests that your opponents are serving? And again, please use their names, both the names of the interests and the names of your opponent.
Well, again, you can look up who their donors are online. It's all public. The fact is, I've had over 200 grassroots events meeting with donors.
I'm allowed here.
Well, you could give me a list, but there's hundreds of millionaires that have donated to their campaigns, and you can find it on their campaign finance documents. You know, again, it's not about that. It's about the fact that I'm the only one who's capped donations at $100 and doesn't take a single penny of special interest money.
Well, Kyle, you know, 2 people are monopolizing this debate, and I think maybe the other 2 ought to be able to step in. And I'd address that question because I am the only candidate that, in fact, has not taken $1 million from out-of-state people who maybe want to be the governor, or for other special interest groups. And so
with all due respect, was anybody offering you $1 million?
We've had conversations with businesses who wanted to do things, and quite frankly, I think there's too much money in this race, and I think it's impacting what voters are hearing. And hopefully at a debate like this, they hear the issues, they don't hear bickering, he said, she said, but they focus on the issues. And so I'm proud of the fact that my donations are coming from friends, colleagues, one by one, and not from any of these big either out-of-state organizations or even in-state organizations.
Ms. Lynne, thank you. Question for Ms. Kennedy. Colorado's largest teachers union is one of your strongest supporters. The teachers have made their aims clear through their recent protests. They want retirement security, they want better education funding, and they want higher pay. Is there anything that Colorado's teachers are asking for that you won't give them?
Well, Kyle, I'm so proud to have the endorsement of the teachers here in Colorado. I've been working to improve public education in Colorado for my entire career, and the teachers have really important issues that they are raising in this race. We have been falling behind in supporting public schools in this state for over 25 years, and our teachers today in Colorado are paid among the lowest salaries in the country. Half of our school districts have cut back to a 4-day school week, and they see the impacts in the classrooms every single day.
Do you believe that all of their demands are reasonable? There isn't anything that they're asking for that you would say, no, sorry, can't do that?
I think teachers should have professional pay, and I think we should give them a raise here in Colorado. I think teachers deserve retirement security. They work a long career, they pay into their pension, and they deserve to retire with dignity. And I think we should be giving teachers more support and resources in the classroom so that they can support the learning of their students.
Thank you.
I want to stick on education for a little bit and hear from all of you. We're going to put two hot topics in education together so we can hear about both. First, what place do charter schools have in our education system? And second, how about district-wide vouchers for private school? And we'll start with you, Ms. Lynne.
So I think the fundamental question is, are we funding our education system at an adequate level? And I think the answer is no. And so we need to get schools more funding. We do need to give teachers a professional wage. And have tests and testing gone too far? Yes. Now, on the issue of charters and how we attack that, I think I've said previously where groups come together in communities to form a charter, I'm in favor of that, as long as there isn't disparate treatment for the people that end up in that charter versus those who stay in the public schools. So I think we can have charters alongside of our public education system, but if I had to choose, and you said, what are my two issues? Funding public education at the level that we ought to be doing it, or supporting charters, I would definitely go with funding public education.
Any room in your view for district-wide vouchers?
I'm not a big fan of vouchers, to tell you the truth, but again, the communities themselves have to make a lot of these decisions. This is sort of beyond where the governor typically can go, but I would be open to thinking about it. I think the governor has to have a much greater role in education than has been had before, because we have 178 varieties of education, and one of the reasons why we have 4-day school weeks or we have teacher salaries different is there's just so much variation. We can't put the money in the legislature and in the governor's office in some of the places we really need it to go.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polis, same questions to you. What is the role of charter schools, and is there any room for vouchers?
You know, I'm running for governor to end decades of underinvestment in our public schools. I fought and won mill levies and bonds in tough areas of the state, statewide campaigns to help fund our schools. I'm proud that I have an A rating from the teachers nationally for my 10 years in Congress, and I'm actually the ranking Democrat taking on Betsy DeVos just 2 weeks ago to oppose reference to privatized schools. I voted against vouchers every time, and I support all forms of public schools, neighborhood schools, good charter schools. You know, I think we need to make sure that our districts are able to meet the learning needs of every child. Many do it through district schools alone. Other districts choose to have some charter schools in the mix to do it. That's up to them. But what's important is they're meeting the learning needs of every child to make sure every child is prepared for success.
Like the Lieutenant Governor, you've said on the record before, though, that that's their prerogative if local districts want to go with vouchers. Is that?
Well, it's a local control state. So, I mean, that's in our Constitution. I would be open to making sure that we have a strict separation between church and state. Public funds should not go to any type of religious schools, and that's in our state constitution as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnston, same two topics to you.
You bet. First of all is no, I don't support vouchers, and I don't think they have any place in Colorado for two reasons. One is our Constitution explicitly says that, and our Supreme Court has upheld it. The second is the evidence is quite clear on this, which is they don't work. They don't actually provide good outcomes for kids who try to access them. So I don't think they're the right solution at the federal level, at the state level, or at the district level. On the charter front, you know, I was a school teacher. I was a school principal. I've taught in schools. I've led many schools before. The idea behind charters was to give teachers and principals and parents more chances to innovate and try things they wanted to try. And I think some charter schools do that really well. Some district schools do that really well. I think we ought to have those choices. I think the key is charter schools ought to play by the same set of rules. That means they ought to make sure they serve all kids, whether those kids have special needs or they're low income or they are learning English as a second language. And I passed legislation to make sure they do that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kennedy, last but not least.
Brandon, we need to focus on making sure that every child in our state can attend a great school. I think there are some good charter schools here in Colorado, but we can't build a system where the success of some schools is coming at the expense of other schools. We need to make sure that all of our kids have access to great education. If your choice is meaningless, if your neighborhood school isn't also a great choice. So we have to focus on all million kids here in our state. I've never supported vouchers. I don't support vouchers today. I don't believe that we should take public taxpayer money out of the public education system. We've been cutting funding for decades in order to send some kids to private schools, and that's an area where there's difference among us on stage.
In a word, do charters have a place in that mix you described?
I told you I support, we have some good charters, but we have to focus on making sure all schools can give the opportunities that right now only some kids are getting in some schools.
All right, thank you.
You all pledged to run a clean and positive primary campaign. But Ms. Kennedy, you're enjoying the benefits of the first negative ad of the campaign being run by your supporters against Mr. Polis and against Mr. Johnston. Set aside the issues that are in that negative ad. What does that back and forth tell us about you as a leader?
So, Kyle, I am running a clean campaign. I am only producing positive ads for my campaign. That ad's being produced by a separate independent group. It would violate campaign finance laws for me to coordinate or even talk to them. That group, that it would violate campaign finance laws to say that. But I will say, I think it's important that teachers in this race have a voice. That ad's been developed by teachers here in Colorado. There are important issues. We're talking about them here today. There are important differences. And teachers took a hard look at the candidates in this race and they endorsed me. And they need to be able to communicate that with voters. But I don't like negative ads and I don't like the tactics of sensationalizing that we're seeing. But we have to respect their right to communicate with voters.
You know, I'd love to respond.
Actually, you're the one person who's not targeted by it, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to go to the others.
But
Mr.
that's
Johnston.
all the more reason why I should.
I think this is a clear leadership question. You made a clean campaign promise, and then you broke it. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can talk right there to the camera and say, take down this ad. If you don't take it down, I'll ask my donors to take their money out, and if not, I'll ask to give back the endorsement. But this PAC is clearly violating the values you said you hold. So either you don't really hold those values, or you don't have the courage to call them to do it. But if your own supporters are not going to follow your lead, how is the whole state going to follow your lead?
Mike, I don't think silencing teachers is leadership.
It's not silencing.
And as you well know, even saying that violates campaign finance laws in Colorado. Look, none of us love the way the system is set up. But that's the way campaign finance is set up here in this state.
I've said very clearly, no one will run a negative ad in my name. And if anyone did that, I would say publicly, take this ad down, or I'd ask donors to give back the money, or I'd give back the endorsement. You can say that
I want to hear from Mr. Polis briefly before we move on.
People want a leader that doesn't pass the buck. You know what? We are responsible. And if things are being said in our name, we can tell our donors, or we can say publicly to you, Kyle and Brandon, that we don't want people doing that sort of thing. But the fact is that Cary Kennedy's super PAC is continuing to tell lies about me when she actually worked for the organization that pushed vouchers in the first place. So again, it's hypocritical. I voted against vouchers every time that they've come up. I've worked for decades to fund our public schools and support our teachers, and the teachers gave me an A. I couldn't have a better grade. So the fact that Cary Kennedy's super PAC is distorting my record supporting our schools, and she isn't willing to stand up and say stop it, I think that shows a failure of leadership.
I want to move on to another issue that we've heard from a lot of folks on. No, actually, you started out on this, so we're going to move on. I want to talk about a program that the Hickenlooper administration is participating in, Pivot to Colorado. They're trying to convince Californians to move to Colorado to take jobs in the high-tech sector. So I'm curious what you all make of that effort. It's a talker. Mr. Polis.
Well, I don't know the way you framed it. I have to look on the proposal. What I feel about growth is for too many Colorado families, they feel like they haven't benefited from growth. You know, yes, we have low unemployment. Maybe you got a 2 or 3% raise at work, but what good is that if your cost of living has gone up 10 or 12% a year the last 5 years? If your commute to work takes 40 minutes instead of 15 minutes. So growth needs to pay its own way, whether that's through impact fees, whether that's through making sure that when people register their new vehicles here, they're paying an additional fee. We need to make sure that Coloradans, those of us who are already here, and I'm proud to be a Colorado native, benefit from the jobs and businesses that we attract to the state. That hasn't always been the case, and as governor, I'd like to do better.
You bring up a fair point, which is that a lot of folks might not be familiar with the details of this. It's largely funded by the tech industry, but the state is offering personnel, support, and some funding to advertise in California and tell folks from the Bay Area to move to Colorado to take jobs here. That was a good point that you brought up. So, Ms. Lynne, what do you make of the effort by your administration?
Well, first of all, as you know, I think our first responsibility is to educate the young people that we have here and get them ready for the jobs of the future. And that's a critical work that we're doing now with a number of apprenticeship programs and trying to think about what the jobs of the future are. I've often said our universities shouldn't just be producing degrees, they should be working with business. So that should happen first and foremost. We're not bringing more bodies here to fill jobs that don't exist. I mean, as you know, our unemployment rate is so low, we have a hard time as the state to actually recruit some of these top talents. And so I think it's an okay effort. I'm glad that it's only technical support and that the industry started itself. But I do think the issue of growth and job growth throughout the entire state is something we really have to tackle.
An okay effort, a ringing endorsement. Mr. Johnston, your thoughts on the state's outreach to California?
I support it, and I'll tell you why, because I've talked to hundreds of technology leaders in the state who are saying we're trying to grow businesses in Colorado and we want to keep them here. We don't want to have to get bought out and move to California or New York, but if we can't get the talent we need to grow, we're going to have to move. So the two parts are, yes, I do think we want to bring more talented engineers and developers to Colorado, but really long-term what we have to do is grow our own talent. And so that's why I've proposed making computer science available in every high school in Colorado so we can have students coming out of our own pipeline that will be able to fill those jobs. Also why I've supported this idea of the Colorado Promise, which will allow people at any stage of their career to get up to 2 years of either community college or skills training that they could earn debt-free in exchange for providing service to the state. So you could move from being a coal miner or a truck driver to a coder or a developer if you wanted one of those jobs.
And we should note that while we try to poach Californians, Ohio's trying to do the same thing to us and get our people. Ms. Kennedy, what do you think of this effort?
Kyle, I don't think we've adequately prepared for or managed the growth that we have today, and yet we're recruiting more and more people to come into our state. We want to protect everything that we love about Colorado. That's going to require us making investment. We need to protect our open space and our public lands. We need to protect our air quality, our water quality, and we need to make investments in infrastructure so that we're not all spending our evenings stuck sitting in traffic and our weekends. So I would like to see our top companies in this state, our most innovative businesses, recruiting from kids that are graduating down in Pueblo and in Trinidad and in Cortez, rather than having to recruit from California.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, we talked about this up at the top, that there's a change in Colorado law this year allowing voters who registered with no party to participate in the primaries. It's something we haven't done here in Colorado before. So real quick, we're going to catch our breath, and you are going to catch up on the rules. If you registered with a party, you'll get that party's ballot in the mail, just like normal. It's too late to change it now. If you registered with no party, they call that unaffiliated, you can expect to get 2 ballots, one for Republicans, one for Democrats, but you're only allowed to cast 1. I repeat, you can only cast 1 ballot. That's why they give you 1 envelope. If you turn in both, your vote will not count. You can handle most voter registration stuff online in Colorado. Just go to govotecolorado.com. There, you can check your registration, update it, or register for the first time, but don't put that off. That's govotecolorado.com. For drop-off locations, in-person voting, or more information, check with your county clerk. Vote early, not often, but make sure you vote by primary election day. It's Tuesday, June 26th. The polls close at 7 p.m. If you want links to all that stuff, it's on 9news.com right now. And with that, we're going to get right back to our questions with our candidates. Correct me if I'm wrong, but none of you want to get rid of the part of Tabor that says you have to go ask voters for new taxes. All right, nobody responding. We'll go on. Mr. Polis, every candidate here has campaigned at one point or another on reforming Tabor. You are the only one I've heard try to have it both ways. You told the firefighters you want, quote, real reform on Tabor, but then you made it sound like no big deal to some of the voters we brought together for a recent event. You said, quote, I don't think it restricts us any more than our imagination does. Which is it?
Well, that's why, you know what, I'm not a robot. I'm going to tell you what I really think every time. Of course I support structural reform to Tabor. I would support, like what Referendum C did, getting rid of the caps, allowing the state to keep surplus revenue. I would support reconfiguring the ballot language so it's not so biased against any revenue. But here's the thing. I'm not willing to wait until Tabor reform is done. Tabor reform has been elusive for years. I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do my best to get it done as governor. But you know what? We don't need to wait. We can fund our public schools today with an initiative. We can fund our roads and transportation today. I'm ready to build a coalition day one with the business community, Republicans, independents, and Democrats, because when you're stuck in traffic, you're not thinking about whether you're a Republican or independent or a Democrat. You want a governor who's going to do something about it. You don't want a governor who's going to debate the intricacies of Tabor law. You want a governor that's going to build more lanes and front range rail and bike commuting, and that's what I'll do.
When we talk about how to fund these things, we're most often talking about asking voters to approve taxes. And it seems like so often in Colorado, we're talking about regressive tax structures and not progressive tax structures. So by a show of hands, would any of you support moving Colorado into the majority of U.S. states that has a progressive income tax?
It's just going to depend what the proposal is, Kyle.
Let's get in.
It's not a blank check.
We're going to hear from everybody on this. Let's try to keep it a little tight. Let's hear from everybody. So everybody supports the idea of moving to a progressive income tax in which higher earners would not just pay more, they would pay a higher percentage. Why?
So I support the idea of it because of exactly what you just said, which is right now what we have is the flat taxes mean that the lowest income earners are taking proportionally more of their income to pay Colorado's infrastructure needs. However, we've tried that before and the Colorado voters didn't support it, and so I think it's going to be a hard thing to pass. I'm focused on what I think the practical solutions are that will actually get revenue into the system, and I think the best thing to do is to go to the ballot in 2020 and repeal the refund mechanism in Tabor, which means you can go to all the conservative counties I've been visiting and say this is not a tax increase or an increased tax rate. It simply allows the state to keep the revenue that will already be generated under the recovery. That's $400 million a year you can put into teacher pay, full day kindergarten, preschool. I think having details for plans that on these things matter, and that's why I've come out on that.
Mr. Johnston, thank you. Ms. Kinney, why a progressive income tax for Colorado?
Well, Kyle, I support it because we shouldn't have the top-ranked economy in the country and rank at the bottom among states in funding our education system, K through 12 and higher education. We can do better than that. We want all of our kids who are growing up in this state to have access to great schools. We know we need to invest. We know we need to invest in infrastructure.
Is that how to do it? Is that how to do it? Would you suggest an income tax hike to fund education?
Well, the first thing we need to do is fix the Tabor Amendment. It is what has forced us to cut those school budgets for decades. So changing the formulas, we have bipartisan support today to permanently modify the caps that are in Tabor, waive the caps that are in Tabor, what nearly every local government in the state has already done. And then we need to get back what Tabor has taken away. We know we're falling behind in investing in our infrastructure, transit and transportation, so we're not stuck in traffic, K-12 education, so all of our kids can attend great schools, and higher education, so we can make sure kids can go to higher ed
I hear you link the two,
getting saddled with debt.
But I don't hear you link the two in terms of a solution. Ms. Lynne, progressive income tax, a lot of people say that would get smoked at the ballot in Colorado.
So thanks, and I'm glad to be answering the question directly because this isn't just about Tabor. This is a question about progressive income tax, and I think fundamentally we all agree there's a certain amount of disposable income people need, regardless of income, to take care of themselves. After that, you know, it's optional. So I do think that part of the reason why things have been turned down is because we haven't been as accountable to the voters. We haven't been as transparent. And that's one of the things I've been working on with Governor Hickenlooper is when you tell them, like we're going to do in the transportation initiative, what roads, how we're going to modify it, what mass transit, what goes to local, then I think voters will vote for things like that and they'll be much more engaged. But blank checks, which I think we're going to see on this ballot in 2018, especially around education, are not going to fly with the
We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Progressive income tax. What do you think how do you convince Coloradans it's a good idea?
Here's why your question is challenging, Kyle. We've tried. Mike Johnston had a noble attempt to fund our public schools. It got 30-some% of the vote. What I'm interested in doing as governor is getting 51% of the vote or more for initiatives to fund our schools and fund our roads. I think it's important that a governor keep an open mind about how to do that because it's not just us Democrats voting. It's unaffiliated voters, it's Republicans, it's Libertarians, it's Greens. I'm confident that we can build that coalition to win at the ballot box, not just try and say we did, but actually win. If it includes a progressive income tax element, all the better. But what we have to do is get 51%, not 30%, so that every child in Colorado can go to preschool and kindergarten for free, so that we can actually make sure that families can afford the cost of life with funding for affordable housing and roads so people can get to work and spend more time with their families.
Thank you, Mr. Polis.
So the sales tax is considered by a lot of people to be on the regressive end of the spectrum, and yet that is how the Chamber of Commerce and the coalition it has put together proposes to pay for roads on this year's ballot. Do you support that ballot question, and why or why not? And we'll start with you, Ms. Kennedy.
I'm really encouraged. I'm pleased to see the business community leading to put it on the ballot. We've been falling behind in our investment in transportation for 25 years, and we're all spending a lot of time sitting in traffic. I know as a working mom, I would come home at the end of the day and oftentimes miss dinner with my kids because traffic is so bad, and we're all feeling the impacts of growth, and we need to make these investments in mobility and in transit, and also in improving our rural roads, which right now about half of them are rated in poor condition. It's hurting our rural economy. So yes, we need additional revenue to support our transportation networks as the fuel tax has been eroding for decades.
All right. Ms. Lynne.
So I think, first of all, we made a big step forward, as you know, in this year's budget to take money out of the budget from the general fund to address transportation needs. So $495 million, you could argue that was somewhat progressive because a lot of it came from income tax and additional taxes that we've collected. But we know it's also not enough. So I support the sales tax. I wish we could increase the gas tax, but I know it doesn't poll well. I know it is also partly regressive, although if we were to invest more money into mass transit and other alternatives, I think we could live with that. But I think, again, that transparency around where the projects will go will allow people to make some decisions about supporting that sales tax increase.
Thank you much. Mr. Polis?
I think it's appropriate to use some general fund money for transportation. Our values on transportation, you can read about my plan at polisforcolorado.com, include front range rail, making sure people can engage in bike commuting lanes, not just new lanes. We need to make sure people can afford to live closer to where they work. Communities are strongest when people that work in communities live in communities. I'm focused on the future. If this passes or doesn't pass, it'll be a different path for the next governor. Frankly, if it doesn't pass, we'll have to roll up our sleeves and end decades of underinvestment in our roads and make sure that we catch up on infrastructure. If it does pass, it's important what the values of the next governor are in terms of multimodal transportation, rail, in implementing the funding mechanism that the voters approved.
Would you rather it did or didn't if you were moving into that office on the first floor?
Well, look, as a sitting governor, I'll have rather had that in place. It's not something I'm going to go out and campaign for or against. I'm going to wait and see, and I'll be ready to deal with what the voters have to say.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnston?
I do support it. And the reason why I support it is I chaired the Senate Finance Committee for 4 years, and I can tell you there are not $20 billion hidden in the couch cushions anywhere in the state budget to fund the long-term infrastructure needs of the state. And while people have concerns about sales tax, our other options are even worse, which is if you go to an income tax, that is only carried by the voters and residents of Colorado. If you go to a gas tax, you know, as people are using less and less gasoline and more electric vehicles, that is a long-term decline, so that won't be sustainable. The benefit of sales tax is it means all the tourists and folks who come to visit the state are actually participating and helping supporting the roads that they're driving on. I do think a key part of this balance is making sure we don't believe we can just pave our way out of this problem, because you just can't add that many more lanes to I-70 or I-25 without hitting the same challenge. You do have to look at mass transit and at ways that we can be more creative about how to use technology to make traffic flow more efficient.
And if I could just get wonky for 10 seconds, you can make a sales tax progressive by having a tax and refund mechanism. So with the money you collect, you can actually set some aside to refund along with income tax to low-income families. I would prefer that model.
That was 10 seconds, so I appreciate that. I want to ask you all about the Olympics. Everybody's talking about the Olympics last week. So there are powerful interests in our state that want to bring the 2030 Winter Games to Colorado, to Denver. Democratic Governor John Hickenlooper supports this. Denver's Democratic Mayor Michael Hancock supports this. By a show of hands, do you support bringing the 2030 Olympic Games to Colorado?
It depends.
With conditions. It depends.
Okay,
We've got two kind of hands.
We've got two hands down. So Johnston Kennedy, maybe, looks like hard nose from Lynne and Polis. So I want to explore this. First, to the folks who are opposed to the idea. Opposed as in you won't put your full support behind it, or you'll go in and say, this isn't happening on my watch. Mr. Polis.
The way I look at it, these are like fun things for like millionaires and business people, but it leaves the rest of us with the debt and the price tag. If you look at every other place that's hosted the Olympics, it leaves a legacy of debt and underutilized infrastructure. I don't think we need it in Colorado, and I think it'll make things worse, not better.
Will you actively campaign against them? There's a No Olympics campaign right now, which I'm sure would love your
What the
support.
Olympics need is the support of a sitting governor. I will not, as a sitting governor, support bringing the Olympics to Colorado. The only carve-out would be if somebody else pays for it, if there's some, billionaire that gives the state the money. We'd look at it, but that never happens. It doesn't happen, and I'm against Colorado continuing with its Olympic bid.
Mr. Polis, thank you. Why do you disagree with your boss on this? He wants the Olympics here badly.
Well, I take it a step further, and I kept my hand down because sometimes politicians equivocate, and I don't think I am one. So I think the important thing about the Olympics is, A, the voters are going to vote on it. And
it's a non-binding referendum, despite how it's been sold to the public. Do you believe there should be a binding referendum that would allow voters to?
I would not be opposed to a binding referendum.
Would you support a binding referendum?
I would support a binding referendum. Now, the difference might be if the organizers of the Olympics were willing to invest in some of the things that we need here, not a skate park, but affordable housing. There will be an impact on our infrastructure. I-70. So if they were willing to kick in and help us fund some of the improvements that we've got to make in I-70, as well as housing, then I would support it. But that's got to be part of the negotiation. It is not in my top 20 priorities. I think we've got to focus on the core issues that we have in Colorado.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, where are you on this idea? Is it something that you're actively supporting? And what would you say to taxpayers who say the Olympics have never been willing to guarantee that taxpayers won't be on the hook? Why would we sign up for that?
So the committee that just issued its report recommended that this question go to Colorado voters. And I think that's a pretty good idea. It went to the voters in 19 for the 76 games, and I think it should go to the voters again. I also wouldn't support it if our taxpayers were on the hook for cost overruns. It absolutely has to be privately.
Olympic Games so far.
Yeah,
would you support a binding referendum, as Ms. Lynne would?
Yes, so binding referendum goes to the vote. And there are new models going forward. If you take a look at, are there opportunities for the Olympic revenues that come in from broadcasting, from sponsorships, from the IOC, to help us make improvements on I-70 so that we are not solely on the hook for putting transit and upgrades to a much needed and very expensive corridor? That might be a real benefit to this state. Can we look at using those revenues to build affordable housing and student housing? Vancouver used its Olympic Village and converted it to student and affordable housing. So I think we should take a look at those opportunities, let the voters decide.
Before we go to Mike Johnston, you did mention broadcasting revenues, so for the sake of transparency, I'll note that this NBC station would probably make a mint. And 2030 is the last year of the NBC contract for the Olympics, but I hope that doesn't affect our coverage here.
We just want
Mr. Johnston,
share a little
where are you on this? Specifically on the idea of should there be a binding referendum, which currently is not being proposed, and must taxpayers be protected, something the IOC has never been willing to do before?
I think taxpayers do have to be protected. And I do think that the key focus of this ought to be, it's the same with the question about Amazon. Do you want 75,000 more cars on the road and 75,000 more homes? Well, for the people who can't find an affordable place to live right now and are spending an hour and a half commute across town, probably not. If you said we're going to take a forward-looking country like Amazon or company or a project like the Olympics to say, let's use that to catalyze a new level of investment in building affordable housing and building infrastructure we need for the 21st century, that would be a good partnership to build out. My requirement would be it's got to be a partnership that addresses the needs Colorado have right now around housing and infrastructure for us to make the investment.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to health care. Issue number one for Democratic voters, according to some Colorado polling. By show of hands, who here wants some version of a public option? All right. Also by show of hands, who believes that a public option should be universally available to everyone in the state as an alternative to private insurance? All right, so let's explore the differences there a little bit. I'll start with you, Mr. Johnston, because you told Colorado Public Radio you thought it would be too disruptive if we just flat out offered a public option that any old person could sign up for.
Yeah, so the key here is what we want to do is make sure that affordable care is available to everybody in the state. What we know right now is that is not true in places like the Western Slope or the Eastern Plains, where you have often monopoly providers. There's only one insurance provider in those places. And so I proposed a public option to allow people to buy in anywhere in the state where they're paying more than 10% of their income into insurance. The benefit is that brings competition, brings choice to places where people don't have it. It also means that you don't risk destroying the markets that are competitive right now, where we have well-functioning markets. In some places, you offer a public option, all the private private providers disappear, and you're back to the same problem of very limited choice. So what we want to do is offer an option that encourages choice, and then if it goes well, you look at expanding it, but you want to start in places where you're not going to destroy markets from the start.
Really quickly, why doesn't that contrast with the party platform, which says that health care is a right, both at the state and national level?
Oh, healthcare is a right. Healthcare is absolutely a universal right. The question is only how you make it universally available. And so I believe that people ought to have an option to buy into that, and they ought to have access to care wherever they live. The question is just what is the best tool to make that care affordable in the most number of places, and I think a public option linked to places where insurance is unaffordable is the best strategy. I also think that means you have to focus on other things like mental health and behavioral health that we're not adequately covering, which means you got to get more providers into rural areas where we see some of the biggest challenges.
All right. You guys are kind of staggered. So Ms. Kennedy, why is that not good enough?
Because I believe we need universal, affordable health care for everyone in our state. And I'm proposing we offer a public health insurance plan right alongside the private plans that are currently offered. It's not going to cost taxpayers money. People will pay premiums for public health insurance plan in the same way that people pay premiums for private health insurance. But we can offer those public plans for less cost, particularly in those counties where there's only one or two carriers in the private market. I hear too often from families that are spending over $1,000 a month, even over $2,000 a month on their premiums, and they just can't afford it. We can offer it for less, and we should pass those savings on to everybody in our state.
How do you keep from driving the private insurers out of business, though, in places where, you know, we're not talking about the Western slope prices?
Well, if they're charging $3,000 a month, they're not much help to the people living there. What you want to do is have competitive pressure on those carriers so that they bring their costs down and they keep their costs in line so that families can afford their health care.
All right, I'm going to go down the line on this. So, Ms. Lynne?
Well, healthcare in 45 seconds. I've spent almost 45 years working in healthcare, and it's pretty complicated. And I would challenge what Cary Kennedy is saying, which is we all agree that we should have universal healthcare coverage. But coming up with slogans, even like a public option or Medicaid for all or Medicare for all, ignores a lot of what goes on in the system. We will only exacerbate the problems of excessive profits that a lot of the participants in the system are experiencing right now, and we've got to address that. If we simply push people into a different structure, we're not dealing with the underlying root causes of why the costs are so high. This is not about charging somebody $3,000. It's about why an MRI is different in one county versus another county, and we've got to get at some of those root causes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polis.
I think you said, Mike said a public option is too disruptive. We need to disrupt health care. Americans are getting ripped off. We spend almost twice the amount of our GDP on health care. Prescription drugs cost 5-8 times as much here as they do in Canada. I am the only candidate running for governor who supports a Medicare for all model. That means a single payer model that gives a basic level of care for everybody. You can get supplemental insurance above or beyond that, just like many seniors do today. The fact is we have a universal care model today called Medicare for our seniors. And you know what? It's not perfect, but it works great, and it certainly works better than not having it. And it would work a lot better if it was allowed to negotiate for prescription drug rates. I would like Colorado to work with other states on a Western payer consortium, or failing that, we have enough critical mass to have enough value and lives covered to be able to negotiate for better rates for you and your family.
Mr. Polis, thanks.
The Republicans will be here on Thursday, 7 p.m., Channel 20, for a discussion just like this one. The clear frontrunner in that race is State Treasurer Walker Stapleton. Please outline specifically to Democratic primary voters why you believe that you would be the strongest choice to face and defeat Mr. Stapleton. Ms. Kennedy, you lost a statewide race to him. We'll begin with you.
I don't believe Walker Stapleton is where the people of Colorado are today. And quite frankly, I don't see myself as running against anybody here on this stage or running against the Republican nominee. I am running because there are things we need to get done here in this state. We are an innovative and forward-looking state. We've built one of the top economies in the country, but we're falling behind in some areas, and our success, our prosperity isn't reaching everyone. We need a governor who's going to make public education Colorado's #1 priority, who's going to make sure health care is accessible and affordable, and who's going to address the impacts of growth so that we protect everything that we love about our state. We protect our land, our open space, our air quality, our water quality. That's why I am running. It's not to defeat any particular individual in this race.
Ms. Kennedy, thank you very much. Mr. Polis, you know that Republicans are hoping you win this primary. They openly talk about how they think that you would be the easiest Democrat to beat. Why are you instead the choice for Democrats and unaffiliated voters who vote in your primary to defeat Mr. Stapleton and whoever comes out of that primary.
Well, they're saying that because that's reverse psychology. They're trying to scare Democrats away from voting for me because they know that I'm the one that's going to beat Walker Stapleton or Victor Mitchell. Look, I have won statewide by 8 points in a year that George Bush carried the state by 8 points. I was able to win. In the district I currently represent in northern Colorado, the biggest, most populated county in my district is Larimer County. Every elected official in Larimer County, assessor, coroner, sheriff, commissioners, all Republican. And I actually carry that county in my election. Why? Because I've been in the real world. I've started businesses. I met payroll. I haven't been a lobbyist like Cary Kennedy. I haven't represented a safe district in Denver like Mike Johnston. But what I've done is I've been out in the communities holding more town halls than any other member of Congress. I was voted the most effective member of Congress. And you know what? People value that real world work. The fact that I've actually met payroll, created jobs, and that connects me with independent and moderate Republican voters.
Mr. Polis, thank you. Mr. Johnston, why do you believe that you would be the strongest choice to go up against Walker Stapleton?
Yeah, you don't have to trust me. You can listen to Republicans. Republicans will say that I'm the candidate they are most afraid of seeing in the general election. And I think that's because I can both win in all parts of the state. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker. I grew up on the Western Slope. We have a broad coalition. And I think, with all due respect to Jared, the reason why you won that statewide race was because you outspent your opponent almost 50-1 in that election. You're not going to be able to do that in the general election, I think, against the Republicans. And so I think people are really looking for who is someone that's going to be able to bring together people from different parts of the state. And in the state Senate, I sponsored and passed more than 100 pieces of legislation with bipartisan support. That meant bringing Republicans and independents together on hard things like immigration reform or education reform or preschool investments or the Obamacare health exchange. Things that are not easy to get Republicans on board with, but they would say I'm the candidate they're most afraid to see, but the ones they'd probably most like to work with once I got in the governor's office.
That was an inconvenient fact, but we honestly don't have time to get into that. I believe his claim was factually accurate.
No, I was just going to say, look, no, Cary Kennedy spent more than Walker Stapleton, but she still lost. So money does not always equate to winning an election.
That was like a triangulation attack there. Ms. Lynne, I want to get to you. Why are you Democrats' best hope against Walker Stapleton?
Well, because I think I'm the only adult in this room. This bickering is insane. The voters want to hear about issues, and they can make the decisions based on track records. Actually, Doug Robinson, who's a Republican candidate for governor, said that I am the candidate that he fears the most. So I don't know who Mike is naming. I've been to all 64 counties. I've worked very collaboratively with the legislature. I have Republicans who think I would be the best governor. Club 20 gave me an award called Building Bridges, which was based on the work to get rural broadband, rural hospitals safe in terms of their ability to survive. So I think I've got that. Walker Stapleton is not engaged in running the state of Colorado. The treasurer's role is very limited. They handle banking and cash flow and investments. They don't build the budget, they don't balance the budget, and he wants to use staplers as a way to balance and save us money. I think he's highly uninformed.
Thank you, Ms. Lynne.
All right, we're going to have to stay tight to time on this one, but we do have time for one where we can hear from all of you. The states offer a check on the federal government. Democratic voters, of course, are very interested in having a check on President Donald Trump. What makes you the better person on this stage to do that? And we'll start with you, Mr. Polis.
You know, I believe that actions are more important than words. I think everybody here will say they'll stand up to Donald Trump, but that's what I've been doing in Washington. I succeeded in helping to defend the Medicare expansion and health care from attacks from Donald Trump. I've been taking on Secretary Zinke against privatizing our public land. Just last week, I took on Secretary DeVos around protecting special education students and transgender students, and I've spoken up against her and taken her on and trying to privatize our public schools. Experience matters. I've started businesses, I've been superintendent of the public schools, but yes, I've gone toe-to-toe with Trump in Washington, and I think Coloradans want a governor that's ready to roll up their sleeves here and protect our Colorado way of life and an inclusive vision for our state. Because one day this bully in Washington is going to take on disabled Coloradans, the next day women, the next day immigrants, the next day Muslims. I'm ready today one to stand up for all Coloradans.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Mr. Johnston.
When I was a school principal, I always used to say that every kid gets a second chance, but no one has the right to bully someone else in their own school or in their own home. And so I'm always willing to try to give people a second chance, but when you over and over and over again come out and try to make people feel small, I think that's something that is contrary to Colorado values. So I think that's something where I'm very clear. I've fought to protect dreamers by passing the asset bill here in Colorado, and I've said that I would not cooperate with his effort to try to deport those 17,000 Coloradans who are right now working as nurses and teachers and scientists. So I think, you know, if he wants to build a wall, we'll build the wall around Colorado and keep Donald Trump out of it, because I think people here are are much more interested in solving problems than they are in throwing bombs. That's much more what the Colorado way is. And I think they're looking for a governor who will actually ignore Trump's silliness, but take on his bullying.
All right, Mr. Johnston, thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Brandon, leadership in the years ahead is going to come from the states. It's going to come from strong governors. We've got an administration in Washington that's trying to roll back 50 years of progress, 50 years of expanding health insurance to nearly everyone here in our state, 50 years of expanding equal protection and civil rights, 50 years of protecting our rivers, our air quality, our public lands. So you will see me as governor fight the administration and not let Washington take Colorado backwards. We are a national leader. We need to be a state that the rest of the country looks to. You'll see me not just fight in the State House, but also in the courthouse. And we will stand up and join with other states where we see policies coming out of Washington that are going to take our state backwards. We will defend our state and make sure we continue to lead.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lynne.
I think we've got to turn the other cheek sometimes to Donald Trump and focus on the work that we have at hand, except when he is being a bully, except when he's attacking people who are vulnerable and that we care about in this state. But I think what we've done in the Hickenlooper administration, and I would continue to do, is just focus on our Colorado issues. We have lots of ways to skin this cat. We work through the regulatory process with all of the federal agencies, and there are a lot of great people that are working on that, both on the state side and on the federal side. And even our Attorney General, as much as I'd like a Democratic Attorney General, our Attorney General, for example, in Masterpiece today, stood up for the rights of that couple. And so I think we've got a multi-pronged way of being able to fight the fight here, have a strong leader, somebody who is experienced, that can actually get the work done.
All right, thank you very much. It is time now for our closing statements. The order was selected randomly, and Ms. Lynne, it just so happens we'll start with you.
Great. Well, thanks. I wish the education question had been about substance as opposed to bickering, because I'm somebody who all my life has gotten things done. I want to close with an important message about what's at stake. It is the voters' decisions. They get to decide, not millionaires, billionaires, or political action committees that are spending outrageous amounts of money. In Colorado, we share the same values. And even on this stage, in some respects, we share the same values. But there are two important differences that I bring to this table. As you said, who's got the best chance to win in November, and who is already ready to lead. Experience matters. I've got 40 years of experience in the public sector and the private sector, leading, governing, managing, and solving problems. Slogans are not what this race should be about, and millions of dollars in TV ads should also not be what this race is about. As governor, I'll get rid of unreasonable profits in health care, I'll work on affordable housing, and I'll make sure that we fix the constitutional morass of tax amendments that we have.
Thank you very much.
Can I say I'd like your support? Is that okay?
Mr. Johnston, it's your turn. Sorry, we're very tight.
Thank you. Sometimes I think you look around and ask yourself, how did we get here to a place where the country feels this divided? I think the more important question is, how do we get out of here? Because Colorado was built by people who refuse to be divided. There are people who say that it's just not possible, that the divides are too deep or politics is too broken. But if we want to build a state where our economic recovery reaches all corners of the state, if we want to make sure that we have health care and housing that we can afford, if we make sure that we can actually build schools that are worthy of the kids who dream there, we're going to need a governor who can lead for all of the families in all corners of the state. I've spent the last 25 years of my career bringing people together to solve the toughest problems in the toughest places. I did it as a teacher in rural Mississippi. I did it as a school principal when we got 100% of our seniors admitted to four-year college. I did it as a senator when I passed more than 100 bills with bipartisan support. Now more than ever, Colorado needs a governor who can cross those divides again.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Polis.
Look, all of us here on the stage share the same basic values, but I think the real question that Democrats and progressive unaffiliated voters are asking is, who is best at turning these ideas into real results? My whole life has been about turning ideas into results. I started and was superintendent of schools serving at-risk kids. I worked with President Obama to expand health care to millions of families. I've worked to fund our public schools here in Colorado, and you know what? There's a lot of work ahead. Working together, we can end decades of underinvestment in our schools, raise teacher pay, day and reduce class size, and we can make sure every child has access to preschool and kindergarten. We can reach 100% renewable energy by 2040 or sooner. I'm proud to be supported by the Sierra Club in recognition of my long work for conservation, to protect our environment and get to renewable energy. And yes, we can join every other country and province in the industrialized world and provide basic health care for every Coloradan and reduce costs. To find out more and to sign up to help me win, go to polisforcolorado.com. I'd be honored to have your vote.
That's time. Ms. Kennedy.
I'm proud to have been a part of Colorado's leadership team, including serving as your state treasurer and as the chief financial officer for the city of Denver. I was able to protect state's investments from losses while I served as treasurer, keep the state's budget balanced, and keep our state on good, strong financial footing, laying the foundation for what today is one of the fastest growing economies in the nation. But too many people in our state aren't benefiting from our progress. We need to make public education our state's #1 priority. I authored the only measure that's passed statewide that took on our Tabor Amendment and increased funding for public schools, avoided even deeper cuts. It needs to be our top priority. We need to keep health care accessible and affordable for everyone here in our state, and we need to do a much better job managing growth so that we protect everything that we love about our state, our air quality, water quality, public lands, open space. I am excited to lead this state as governor and would be grateful to have your support.
Our thanks to the candidates. Our thanks to everybody who has been watching at home. The Republican candidates for governor debate Thursday night, 7 p.m. on Channel 20. For Brandon Rittiman, I'm Kyle Clark. Good night.